bodes well for them. So thank you all for coming today. My name is Patrick Wheeler. I remember that part. I'm Director of Enterprise Security Solutions at TrendMicro. Been in the industry for, as I mentioned, for quite some time, managing enterprise security products for a range of companies. Fair bit of experience with enterprises, but also in public sector. Actually, I was a former academic, so I even know the kind of loosey-goosey, wild and crazy academic environments that everybody loves so much to try and secure. So I'm going to talk today about the rise of consumerization. And I think, first off, I would say actually that in some ways the title itself is a bit of a misnomer, because the rise of consumerization implies that it implies in some way that it's sort of happening, but in fact, it's really happening. It's interesting because 2 years ago, the term consumerization was still pretty much a vendor term. And it just, in the middle of about 2011, actually, the term itself gained popular currency. It wasn't just a marketing term since the vendors. I had customers actually coming to me saying, what are your solutions for consumerization? But also, I think in some regards now, consumerization really as a trend is something that is broadly understood and recognized. And I think now it's really at the point where companies, organizations are really trying to deal with what it means. When you look at the existing IT landscape, you can see just some numbers as background. The numbers are immense at this point. 2.3 billion internet users, a trillion URLs indexed by Google. And a trillion is just an enormous number. 1 billion Facebook users. I think actually now there are 1.2 billion. They keep growing. 427 million smartphones sold last year. Once again, that's the population of the United States and Canada and I think Mexico. So big numbers. 50, and I think a big change that even the established vendors are actually struggling with. 54% of Facebook's access is via mobile, and it's changing their business model. They're having to try and figure out how do we sell advertising, how do we sell apps, how do we make business when most of our users have shifted to mobile from PCs. 665 million websites. Actually, that's one number that surprises me and seems surprisingly low. For some reason, I would think that there would be even more. So that was the only one that kind of shocked me. What's also interesting is how fast things have been adopted. These numbers actually really surprised me when I was we're doing the research and I found these out. When an iPod came out, it seemed like everybody had an iPod. The reality is, after 2 years, there were only 1.3 million iPods in the market. Whereas after 2 years, there were 66 million iPads. So when you say, God, it seems like everybody has an iPad, well, everybody does. I mean, that's the population of France, or the UK, or Thailand. So if every man, woman, and child in France had an iPad, that would pretty much be their base. And that was after 2 years. iPhones have actually been adopted very rapidly. And I think, interestingly, to my mind, in my experience, I saw companies, both public sector, private sector, really struggling with these devices, with iPhones, 3-4 years ago. And they were generally allowing them on a case-by-case basis. Oh, the CEO gets access, some of the execs get access. The iPad was the killer app, as it were. Right? It's not really an app, but it was the device that changed the game. All of a sudden, IT teams had to find a way to accommodate these because it wasn't just the execs. They were actually trying to bring them in more broadly. And this rapid adoption isn't just applying to devices. We think of consumerization as being about devices, but it also involves apps, applications. 1 million users is a long-standing benchmark. It took AOL 9 years to get to 1 million users. It took Facebook 9 months. Remember, there are a billion now. It's 1,000 million. It took Facebook 9 months. It took Draw Something 9 days to get to 1 million users. So I mean, the rates of adoption, the numbers are huge, and the rates of adoption, the rate with which things take off, have increased exponentially. It's orders of magnitude faster. So this is the thing I think. This is the environment we're struggling with. Consumerization isn't just about people wanting to use iPhones at work. That's one tiny corner of the problem. It's about an exploding environment of devices, rapid adoption of new platforms and new devices much faster than you're going to actually be able to develop agents or policies or tools for them. And also that this extends beyond devices to applications, to services. And so when we look at consumerization, there are really 3 main trends that we've identified as as challenges that businesses are really struggling with: cyber threats, cloud and virtualization, and consumerization. We're going to zero in on consumerization. And I think Many of the policies that we have in place, and for example, when you look at SIM 66A, you know, that defines a lot of the access for devices in the public sector in California. A lot of that's in many ways based on an IT environment that really existed 10 years ago. You know, you have mostly PCs. Some people work, but not. Some people work remote, but most actually work from the office. You have some Macs, but you know they're a corner case, so you can kind of ignore them because you know maybe 3% of your users have them. It's just the folks in the graphic arts guy and the security guy who have Macs, so we're not going to worry about them. You know, and now you have an environment where in the last not even 10 years, it's been 3 or 4 years, you've had an explosion of so Apple iOS devices, iPhone and iPad, if you combine them actually, put them above the other two. Android, the fastest growing smartphone and tablet platform in the world, even in the US. RIM, BlackBerry, obviously still huge. You know, as users become more mobile, as organizations try and make their IT operations more mobile, they've been leveraging BlackBerry. Also Windows, you can never discount Microsoft. And then what's interesting though is you have then smaller platforms. So once again, that proliferation, this rapid adoption. I bet you nobody can tell you what the fastest growing mobile platform will be 2 years from now because it probably doesn't exist yet. But also look, this line was Mac. So 3 or 4 years ago, once again, you could have pretty much predicted that most enterprises or most organizations, had 3 to 6% of their IT environment was Macs. It was mostly limited to folks in creative arts, or creative services, graphics, design, marketing, computer guys, because Mac was perceived as more secure, and because you could run dual boot with Linux, you could run all your, you could run all our cool Linux tools on it. And that was it. But now there's a halo effect. The halo effect from iOS that's really increasing Mac usage in IT environments. So, your IT environment is getting more complicated. And at the same time, remember, we are all consumers. You can rebel, you can say I'm not a consumer, I'm a producer. But at the end of the day, we're employees. We're consumers, and we're also employees. And so, everyone that you're bringing into, so as employees, our thoughts. Both as IT managers, as IT decision makers, and also our own employees, our approaches are also shaped by our activities as consumers. We're thinking about, we're used to having access. We're used to having access from our smartphones, from our tablets, from our different computers. We're used to using different apps kind of whenever we want and wherever we want. We're used to sharing data. It's amazing watching kids. Kids. Even like by kids, I mean 10 and 12-year-olds even. Sitting there zapping, files, photos, whatever, back and forth between their iPod touches, their hand-me-down Android, their mom's old iPhone, and their new iPad. They're going back and forth. My wife and I were both used to be professors. My wife actually just now returned to teaching after 10 years. And the biggest shock for her, coming back into the classroom as a teacher after 10 years, was that every kid has devices, and they're always on them all the time, or want to be on them all the time. So these things are there. And these kids are going to be your employees. They're going to be the state employees. They're going to be the private sector employees. They're going to be the engineers, the water quality engineers who work for geosurveying. They're going to be the ones who are actually doing public health research. They're going to be the ones in the field for sociology and public services. And they're used to this. They're consumers. So going in and saying, you can't do this because that's not allowed, this isn't really going to work for all of them. And so I think, there are some environments where you can say, yes, it's a very locked-in environment, and this is a trade-off you make to come work here. However, everyone's competing. It's interesting. Even in an environment with high unemployment, everyone's still competing for the same handful of people. And so to attract them and retain them, you have to focus on also enabling them to work the way they want. At the same time, how do you get better visibility and control? How do you have happy, productive employees? I've actually been a big skeptic of the productivity and cost savings arguments of consumerization. Because I think there hasn't been a lot of data behind it. I think it shifts costs. So there's maybe organizational cost savings, but it shifts your costs from the company to the employee. Instead of the agency or the organization paying for the data plan, now the employee is. The employee is buying the device, maybe with a little bit of a stipend or allowance. That's what Trend does. Productivity. What are the productivity increases? Well, actually, there was a great study at Intel actually demonstrated that Intel Corporation is expanding their BYOD program because they found, after piloting for last year, they found 57 minutes per day increase in employee productivity. I was shocked. I mean, this is very recent, but this is the first time I've really seen solid data demonstrate from a big environment that there are productivity gains from BYOD. And 57 minutes per day, that's basically 5 hours a week. So in an environment where where state employees are having to do a furlough day every 2 weeks, wouldn't it be nice to gain back almost an hour every day? So, talked to a customer last year, big name in social media, cloud-based services, and they were really struggling. They use our Macintosh client, and they were really struggling because they were heading toward they were struggling trying to accommodate the number of Mac clients they were getting in their environment. And I said, well, what's your normal percentage? And they said, well, we're at 15% right now. And I said, what are you heading towards? 50%. So half the clients in their environment are going to be Macs. I said, what would your ideal be? He said, 0. I said, think about it. In an ideal, from an IT perspective, a monoculture, even though Ryman, again, as our CTO says, hackers love a monoculture. I can't remember Ryman, but hackers love a monoculture, but so do IT industries because it's easy. It's all Windows. Everything is done through AD. It's a single platform, single operating system, single management, very simple to manage. The fact is, though, that the monoculture in corporate IT environments, and this goes even for public, for state agencies, federal agencies, et cetera, is really a dying breed. You have an environment where instead, in the past, you had really fairly limited set of things you did. File sharing was all done through, file servers. Email and messaging was all run through Exchange. You had a suite of productivity tools that were part of Microsoft Office. You had one operating system. Maybe the black sheep out there were running, I said iOS or Linux, Mac or Linux, or you had maybe for browsers, you maybe had some rebels who liked to use Chrome, or Safari, or the real radical ones were using, Opera. Now, complete transformation. You have a much wider array of activities, first of all. Device hopping. How many of you have 2 laptops? And keep your hand up if you work on both of them. Okay. And keep your hand up if you work on both laptops and a mobile device. All right. So that's the thing. You have this device hopping, this idea of you're working between different devices. I have my standard issue, corporate America black laptop, which I love and I use a lot because I'm used to using it. I have a MacBook Pro that I got probably so my son could play Minecraft and not trash my wife's computer, and partly because I wanted to actually really learn how to use Mac, and because it is a way to really I liked a lot of what it could do for other things. But so now I work on my Mac and my work machine, and now also work from my iPad and my iPhone, and they're all supported by my company, but only one of them is actually owned and managed by the company. So directly managed anyway. So this kind of device hopping is commonplace. We're working between these different devices. However, it creates questions about how do I get data from these devices? How do you share data via USB to your iPhone? You don't. You use things like cloud-based synchronization and sharing. You have collaboration, people working together in these environments. iPads are becoming big environments for collaborative tools. We're seeing them in things like shop floor, site research, environmental work. And social networking obviously is always very important, but the days of a company having one user, one computer in the entire company that is allowed to access Facebook or Twitter are over. Social networking is really much more broadly adopted because organizations, both public and private sector, recognize that there's actually real value in that, in connecting with customers, with end users, with citizens. And so, as a result of that, you have a wide range of platforms. You've got not just Windows, but also iOS, Mac OS, Android, BlackBerry, VMware, virtual platforms, and ... So, anybody know who bought WebOS? You remember?
HP? No.
HP just sold WebOS.
Right.
They sold it to LG.
That's right.
LG is going to put WebOS in televisions. you're going to have essentially an embedded smartphone platform running in your in televisions. It's also going to be going televisions or cameras. I mean, try and find a laptop nowadays that doesn't have a computer. A camera, a user-facing camera. You can't do it. I remember the days of reading, when I read Cryptonomicon. I always think of that scene in Cryptonomicon where he's taking pictures of users as they come up, and then tracking their identity later. And I'm always paranoid. I'm like, I don't want anybody taking my picture. But the fact is that now everything comes with a user-facing camera. Televisions will too. So all of a sudden now you're going to have televisions in conference rooms with cameras and web OS. Basically embedded operating systems. So refrigerators, home heating, ventilation, air conditioning, all these systems, they're internet connected. What do you do when you get a device that's internet connected? And, well, what's your standard procedure for connecting a device that has that's IP ready in your environment? You wireless, you get a DHCP. What do you like to connect to? Okay. Yeah. So does anybody use VLAN? Just give it guest access. It goes to internet and nowhere else.
For the
I'm in business.
You're talking about for like a guest network?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not ready to roll it out yet, but yeah, there'll be a guest network that really goes through the proxy server and then to the internet without touching the office network.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so guest VLANs with internet-only access are pretty common for these kind of IP-connected devices. So a researcher over the course of last year basically built a 400,000 device botnet using basically 3 default logins to get into embedded Linux OSs. Just the telnet login using root blank and one other. And even with some parameters, he actually detected 1.2 million embedded devices that he could have connected to. He could have actually put the bot on, but didn't. Instead, he just used, he set some parameters for ones that would be beneficial. Technically, this is illegal in many countries. He used it to create a map of the internet. Essentially, it's the most comprehensive mapping of the internet. The file itself is like 9 terabytes. You can actually download it if you want, or you can go to their website. But it's really interesting because so he compromised a third of the devices that were out there with simple default passwords. These are embedded Linux devices. And you think, oh, well, this was an anomaly, it's the first way he's tried it. No, he actually found bots that were already there. So he actually displaced bots with his own bots. So you can tell if this researcher is thinking of this and trying to use it for ostensibly benign purposes, somebody else is out there thinking of how to use it for malicious purposes. And all these televisions, all these refrigerators and coffee makers and HVAC systems, which I say it jokingly, but it's actually not fun, but far from the truth, that are getting connected, are getting VLAN, basically going on the guest VLAN, are getting connected to the internet, and they're getting scanned for, they're once again exposed then to these internet-based attacks. So I think, we can run this line for these operating systems out farther and farther and farther because there are going to be more and more devices that are connected with the internet. Consumerization goes way beyond just smartphones, tablets, laptops, the different end user devices. It's going to actually touch everything. So once again, thinking about how that affects your environment. Same thing for browsers. You've got browsers on your smartphone, browsers on your tablet, browsers on your laptop. Chrome, obviously, a big. But what's interesting now is that you have essentially web browsing through social media apps. The portal of old has now been replaced by your social media app. They want to actually be your portal to the internet. So you have, Facebook, you have Twitter, you have things that are basically doing rendering for rendering HTML pages, which then makes them conduits for browser-based attacks. So what do you do if your social media connection actually uses an SSL, if your social media app uses an SSL connection that basically bypasses your normal security monitoring? Office productivity apps, and once again, not just Office 365. Microsoft gets huge credit for actually really moving to the cloud with Office 365. Then, regardless whether it's leading the charge or it being in response to Google Docs, we have other productivity tools. Star Office. I don't know. Have you ever heard of Star Office? Open Office. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. So Open Office. I know big in public sector, big in university as well. So once again, open source. But also Evernote. You're seeing these note-taking tools, these note-taking applications that actually are becoming very popular. Evernote's great. I can connect and use Evernote across all my different devices, create files, create notes, share them, whatever. We'll come back to Evernote. It's an interesting case. And then Box. So cloud, so instead of just, setting up a file server for you just to get data or using a thumb drive, I got this handy dandy, really cool 4 gig like credit card sized flash drive, but honestly, I never use them because, because honestly, I share everything through cloud-based file synchronization and sharing. And so you've got things like iCloud, but also Dropbox, Box.net. What happens when you rely on cloud-based productivity suites, cloud-based file synchronization and sharing? What happens to your employee productivity when the largest distributed denial of service in history slows down the internet? I mean, everybody knows this is going on like right now. There's Spam House has been under a DDoS for the last week roughly. It was what, 300 gigabytes per second of traffic, which is the biggest known one before that, I think, was like 90 or 100 gigabit or 90 or 100 gigabit per second. So, 400 gigabits per second is enough to actually slow down the internet. So what do? What happens to your productivity when all of a sudden these cloud-based solutions that your employees rely on are no longer available or are very slow? And people don't like things being slow. So user behavior is risky by nature. At the end of the day, education is critical. But there are so many applications to so many platforms. I mean, like I said, I firmly believe the platform, the device that is going to be giving you the most headaches in 2 years hasn't even been invented. Doesn't exist today. And it will be. And it will be driving you nuts 2 years from now, and you'll be like, another, and another, and another. So at the end of the day, you trying to just tackle devices or just tackle, manage individual devices, for example. It's a losing game. Or manage just individual platforms. So I'll deal with all the Androids. Well, okay, great. What happens when Samsung makes their own version of Android, which they probably will? Do you then have to create another agent or another platform or another management solution for that? So on the one hand, when you look at, where do the data losses actually come from? The traditional apps and stuff are still really where a lot of it happens. Got 70% of data loss is actually traced to USB memory sticks. We did surveys of mid-sized organizations and found that when they talk about data loss prevention, the industry is talking about policy and monitoring for content and all that stuff. And most mid-sized organizations tell us, they're like, I'm worried about losing data via data leakage via USB and email. That's it. All the fancy policy stuff are great, but all I really want to do is I want to control what gets copied on USBs, and I want to monitor, make sure nothing leaves by email. So email, and then that's the reason why is because, once again, USB memory sticks, major avenue, not only potentially for attacks, but also for data loss. Malicious URLs, obviously, they're all over the place. Web-based attacks are incredibly prominent. They're a major vector for malware. But also phishing. There's even different kinds of phishing. You have spear phishing. We got all these clever terms: spear phishing and whaling, as a term, not the concept, obviously. So this idea of you think of it, phishing in the past was just spam. But phishing uses social engineering and the way people behave in organizations. The idea of creating an appearance of authenticity or legitimacy around an email to actually trick people into opening an email, into clicking on a file, into looking at a web page. So this kind of spear phishing is targeted. The spear phishing, this more sophisticated kind of phishing, has really transformed spam into genuine attacks. And I think what makes it different is that it's targeted. So in the past, phishing, what we call phishing, was just spam. But now it actually goes after specific organizations. Look at almost every high-profile data breach you've seen in the last 2 years, and I think I have a hard time thinking of any that didn't begin with phishing. Yeah, there are still worms out there. Configure still makes some news, but at the end of the day, most of all the big ones that I can remember in the last 2 years have really been driven by phishing. A great example of this, and these are, the reason is because these are targeted attacks. You can go after a specific organization, find out about who is in the organization, insert yourself into their email hierarchy, into their organizational hierarchy, take advantage of that. And these targeted attacks really are the new norm. That was another thing. I think 2 years ago I would have said consumerization was an industry term, a vendor term, and not really something like that. I said the same thing about APT, advanced persistent threats, what targeted attacks. I mean, targeted attack is a better term, but I think targeted attacks have gone from being concepts, being corner cases, to being the norm. And I think that's something that we also, that if I look at the two biggest changes, use of cloud stuff been around for a while, use of mobile been around for a while. The prominence, the prevalence of these smartphones, of these consumerized devices is a major change. And the prevalence of these targeted attacks, actually, this is what everybody's dealing with. And so, you have not just, you have hacktivism, anonymous out there going after different agencies. I would say that anybody who's involved in any kind of litigation, court cases, even anything environmental is going to have to worry about hacktivism, for example, by anonymous, but also state-sponsored attacks. And I think, South Korea is a good example. What we saw in South Korea last week is actually a very good example of, what's happening. You've got a highly technical, technology-driven economy, highly technical populace. They had 100 megabit connections to the home like 10 years ago in South Korea. It was amazing. I mean, you go there, and in the U.S., you're lucky if you had you're still going on dial-up. Maybe you had, DSL, and there you're sitting there watching movies over. They didn't have the amount of content we have though. But you have a internet technology-driven business, lots of manufacturing, lots of high tech, lots of research. You have a hostile neighbor to the north, and a government, fortunately, that's focused on risk prevention across the government industry. But you still, at the end of the day, they're still vulnerable to attacks because these targeted attacks bypass a lot of the traditional attacks. If you take a traditional reactive, because in organizations that took reactive approaches, that were focusing on the kinds of attacks we've seen for the last 10 or 15 years, a lot of things are going to get through. So they were actually crippled by a phishing email that targeted certain users in certain organizations. It actually then set a string of events that caused the download of a master boot record wiper, MDR wiper, which would then reboot the machine. It comes back up. Machines don't like being rebooted when they don't have an etc or a user directory, for example, or a master boot record in Windows. So those systems were, so basically it flattened, a lot of systems in banking, in creating television, in news. The other thing is that, how do we know this? Because Trend actually has been present in that, and we actually have been working in that with customers there for a long time, using a solution we have that actually monitors for targeted threats. And so there's actually a lot of information available about how they work. And it really changed, when you really look at how these attacks work, you can actually see that there really is a change. It requires a change in the way that you approach attacks. So attackers are taking these corner cases. They're going after corner cases. They're going after the individuals rather than the whole company as a way to get into the organization and achieve a larger aim. We talked about device hopping. One thing we found, we've done some research and found that organizations out in generally it's more in the private sector, about 76% allow BYOD, that is, they allow users to connect their own devices to the corporate IT resources. And 47% of them actually had a data breach related to BYOD. So they had said, okay, bring your own device, but then they didn't put the proper controls in place to actually allow that. 1 million malicious Android apps have been found by the end of 2013. Malware on Android app stores, either the official ones or on secondary Android app stores, is a major problem. But the malware writers have actually gotten really clever because Google, to their credit, has done a really good job learning how to scan for malicious apps, like Trojan apps, on the Google App Store. So what they've done is the attackers now put valid apps out. They put what's that new game, Candy Crunch or whatever? Yeah, they'll put up a new Fruit Ninja or Bad Piggies or whatever else it is. My son loves to get this in the game. I pay the dollar to do it on my wife's iPhone. Actually, no, I set up an old iPod Touch for him that all his games are on. But the reality though is that that the attackers got really clever. They caught on to the fact that Google was detecting the Trojan apps. So now what they do is they have legitimate seeming apps. But then, once they're running, they actually will call malicious URLs. And so they'll capture end user information. They'll go to malicious websites, and then from there pull down malware. Or they'll open a web page that has malware. So, and Android can actually run malware in a way that, so far iOS has not been able to. So, the attackers are once again staying ahead. So if you just focus on just one thing, on just the device, or just the app, or just the platform, attackers are going to stay ahead.
I actually have to pay for that.
Yeah, well, I think that was the thing. They capitalized the fact that, hey, look, get Candy Crunch or whatever it is, or Bad Piggies for free. So yeah, well, so it's free, but the app is, you get Bad Piggies for free, and the malware is just a bonus. So, and once again, this comes, I think one thing to keep in mind here is that, we consumerization of IT, but, Gartner actually signaled, and others have signaled that this is also the year that they have the ITization of the consumer. 10 years ago, how many of your end users, your average employees could have set up a home wireless network, could have configured an iPhone, could have configured a Mac to connect to your Exchange server? Probably the ones who if any, probably, it's a very few who were not already IT employees. Nowadays, many users can actually do this. So you can take advantage of that because users are more technically aware, especially, under 30s. So you can actually leverage that as part of your education. Say, look, we know you're smart to do this. You want to do this? Help us. Good question.
Well, what's the statistics for just iOS and Apple apps?
So Apple's curated App Store method, there is only one place to get Apple apps from. So that actually, and they review each one in detail, so that actually gives them much more control. So the curated App Store, people, it's kind of like, to me, I'm reminded almost of the way Macs were, 5 or 6 years ago. Macs are more secure because there's no viruses for them. The viruses were there, just they weren't that common. In the Apple environment, they aggressively curate the Apple App Store. So, so far there are no major incidents. However, so there have been instances where there have been occasional instances where researchers have managed to put a malicious app up on the App Store. Apple detects it and takes it down relatively quickly, but it still gets through. But in some ways, Apple users rely on the App Store for their line of defense. But there were German researchers who actually last year already figured out how to actually insert malware on an iPhone using a PDF. So it can be done. And so I think we tend to focus on data protection on these devices, encrypting and protecting the data on the device. If the device gets lost, how do I ensure that no sensitive data is exposed? But we also need to think about security measures because attackers are, think of the number one attack for Macs is actually Java-based. So, through the browser. Yeah, well, exactly. But, you look at Flashback. Flashback used a Java attack. And so you need to have, this kind of these browser-based attacks that go after Apple devices are going to bypass the App Store the same way that they bypass other devices. Yeah.
But isn't it the case, too, with Apple, they're kind of like almost as good as your mom for protecting you because they remove Java if you haven't used it in 35 days. They remove the plugin and they don't install it by default either. So you kind of have to really be sure you want it, like for your son's Minecraft, for example.
Yeah.
Before you can, it's not even on the machine.
Yeah, that's a good point. And they did that. Apple is actually, and Apple, to their credit, has really, they've improved, even, from the end, they've improved their MDM APIs. They put in measures to protect against Java-based attacks and the things that are most commonly exploited against Macs. So they are doing things to help. At the same time, they did that. The Java restrictions actually were in response to Flashback. So and once again, the attackers have shown time and time again. Apple they figured out an angle. Apple then addressed it. They'll always stay one step ahead. So by the time you hear about it and Apple has addressed it, the attackers have already figured it out and are moving on to something else. I think the last one, so it's a great point, and I think the vendors really do deserve credit. Microsoft, I remember when Code Red came out, as probably most of you do, Code Red and Code Blue, and the damage they wrought. What was the one, SQL Slammer? You couldn't get any money out of your ATM for 2 days. I mean, the vendors at Microsoft did a tremendous job responding to that. The industry really changed. Apple has done a great job adapting. Google has done a great job with Android. I think the vendors are trying, but the attackers are so resourceful that once again, if you try and focus on just solving things tactically, on securing your iPhone, or just securing Android, or just doing this one platform in this app, you're going to miss the bigger picture. There's always going to be some angle. Last one I would say is, device loss is actually one of the major causes of data breach. So 30% of mobile devices lost last year. Raise your hand if you ever lost your iPhone or your smartphone. Okay. All right, so if you've lost it, you're willing to admit. I have. I got it back though. I lost my iPhone. I left it in a Tokyo Starbucks. I was there on a business trip, and I left it on a counter in a Tokyo Starbucks. And I was like, oh man, yeah. And I was going to go back to the hotel room and just wipe it because I had the new iOS that would let me do the remote wipe. But I said, you know what? Just try it. And I went back and it was there. An hour and a half later, it was there. Tokyo is the only place in the world where you could actually leave an iPhone on a table and it will be there when you come back. So in some ways I got I got a pass. I got a pass card because I'm not going to get that. It's not going to happen again. So so odds are your users, 1 in 3 of users are going to lose a device. And then finally, cloud synchronization and sharing. So users often would say to us, I have a Dropbox problem. I'm like, no, you don't. You have a file synchronization and sharing. Because if they don't use Dropbox, they're going to use something else. They're going to use Box. Box, to their credit, really, I noticed an opportunity in the business environment that Dropbox has missed. But itself, once again, Dropbox itself, but each of these have challenges if they're not part of a broader process. SharePoint users knowingly risk data. And I think, interestingly, 14 million Facebook accounts are undesirable. It's an interesting statistic in and of itself. But I think, when you think of the fact that people are creating accounts out there, once again, it's social media, it's social engineering. Someone creates a Facebook account using names that are fairly common. Oh yeah, I think I know that person. Except then they send you a link. Hey, I thought you might find this interesting. Well, they're a friend of mine. Okay, cool. Click on it. Boom. Okay, now Facebook has run a malicious, has basically inserted a malicious app on my MacBook or on my laptop, or has basically now directed me to a malicious website on my iPhone. But I think when you look at things like Evernote. So Evernote, love Evernote. I have friends who now, that's another good example of an app that in a very short period of time has become indispensable. So we actually, our own researchers found it got published I think last week, but it just is making the news this week about the Evernote. Evernote is actually being used by malware as a command and control distribution site. So Evernote will basically, the malware on your system will basically connect back to control servers that actually run through Evernote. You can actually send files, for example, file data that's been stolen from your machine, from your account up into Evernote itself. So these applications and systems are actually being used by attackers as well because they're so prevalent. And once again, this is a threat that if a year ago someone had said, hey, what do you do about Evernote security? Who would have said, what's Evernote? So at the end of the day, what do we do? What can we do? And I think, the main answer I have for everyone is, regardless of who you use, don't just try and solve the Facebook problem, or the Evernote problem, or the iPhone problem, the iPad problem. Think broadly. You already have a suite of solutions in place in your environment. You have tools and policies and practices around email, around laptop management, around endpoint, around mobile, around these other things. Think holistically about how to actually manage them, and then think of it in terms of a more complete approach across all your end users. What are your end users trying to access, and where are they trying to access? And then focus on that. So, and don't necessarily assume that if you want to do, for example, data loss prevention on your user's iPhone, you have to have an agent for iPhone. What are they connecting to with their iPhone? They're connecting to the Exchange server. So why not use data loss prevention integrated on your mail server? Microsoft actually now offers this through as part of Exchange as well, as do we and other vendors. So there are ways you can leverage different layers of your infrastructure to provide protection in a way that you can't always protect at the individual device level or at the app level. So use your infrastructure, use things like mail security, anti-malware, content, data loss prevention, application control across your environment at the endpoint, server, gateway level to actually protect, because that's the only way that you're actually going to be able to get ahead of these attackers. Because at the end of the day, they're going to go after little angles. They'll always find something. And so the only way to get ahead of that is to actually take a more comprehensive approach. with our shields. But I think the idea, once again, any device, anytime, anywhere. Application control, just as an example of this new an approach here. What's application control? Oh, I already included it. So application control, we usually think of application control as whitelisting and blacklisting, on the PC. But it also actually includes things like you can use application reputation. What if you could say, you know what, I don't want to go through the approval process for apps and say, every time somebody wants to connect to an app that's not whitelisted, I don't want to go through this approval process. I want to just say, if this app has a good reputation, allow users to install it. So leverage your reputation information. The same way that everybody now uses reputation for file and web access. Behavior monitoring. What if users are trying to access certain apps, if apps or the users themselves are trying to access malicious websites? Policy enforcement. It's this idea of permitted use enforcement. And also delivery and data security. One of the major challenges for mobile is really around apps. So for example, Evernote fixed, Evernote, I'm sure, if they haven't already, will fix this backdoor issue. They'll push out a new version, just as LinkedIn pushed that new version to their apps and others. So how do you make sure that your users are actually running the latest version of Evernote, on their work machines? How do you make sure that they're running the latest versions of Java or other applications or other applications and services and software on their systems? So detecting and enforcing apps, both versions, use, and whitelist and blacklist across web, mobile, and endpoint through a comprehensive approach is really the way to approach it. So I think there's a lot of tools out there. But I think more than anything, I would say when you think about end user security, don't just think of endpoint security. And this is one of the things I find most when I talk to IT professionals is that the silos really get in the way of this. A lot of times I'll talk with the endpoint team, the security team, who maybe don't communicate with the data center team, who don't talk to the network guys, who don't plan, maybe hopefully you guys are more coordinated than that, everybody gets along, but I find a lot of environments where there's actually a sort of shocking lack of communication. Well, I would like to say it was a shocking lack of communication, but the fact is that in order to address the challenges, you need to, first of all, don't reinvent the wheel. You've got a lot of solutions in place. You've got a lot of the tools. You have the people. Everyone's smart. Everybody wants to do the right thing. First of all, define your policy. You have things like the SIM 66A that defines, who can and can't be allowed access. You have, the collective bargaining agreement as well. But at the same time, remember that those are often based on older approaches, older IT environments. You can say yes. But you don't say yes to everything for everyone. Not every smartphone and not every user should be able to connect their iPhone or their iPad to your Exchange server. But don't ignore the corner cases, because the attack is coming. In the world of targeted attacks, which is now the world we live in, attackers are going after things that in the past were ignored. The Macs, the smaller apps, the less known systems. You don't necessarily have to devote all your efforts to fixing them, but at least think about how you're going to manage them. So I have tools that integrate for a complete solution. Once again, because you don't want 7 layers and 25 consoles. You want a single solution that gives you protection across the layers and across your user environments. And finally, have a plan B. So when, not just incident recovery, not just what do we do when an outbreak happens, but also continuity operations recovery. So for example, as I mentioned, when the internet gets slowed down and you can't, due to, an even bigger distributed knowledge service attack, or there's power failures to basically take out your data center. Most of you have continuity operations and DR in place for those, but have something for your end user applications and your end user productivity as well. If the power goes out, Hurricane Sandy took out power for all of Manhattan for like parts of Manhattan, New for like 5 days. People were charging their phones at like one Starbucks, or at Starbucks in Lower Manhattan because they didn't have power. So how are your employees, who you count on to be productive using their smartphones and their tablets, going to power their devices? Think about that for a second. Because as we become dependent on this consumerized environment, it changes the way we need to think about power, recovery, disaster continuity. So, and once again, don't forget about the televisions. Because that, 5 years from now, that television is going to have a computer in it, it's going to have a camera facing you, and just as an example, or your refrigerator. A friend of mine actually has a refrigerator with a computer monitor on it, and it's internet ready. It just doesn't have an operating system yet. So, the stuff's already, people are getting ready for it. So, anyway, thank you very much. Sorry I didn't leave much time for questions. I hope that was